scheduled start time to resume this inquiry, which relates to the development in Potash Road, rear of numbers 41 and 65, for a proposed development in outline for 150 dwellings and a 50-bed care home. Before we resume with the programme, just a couple of items of housekeeping. At round about lunchtime, we'll be taking a rain check on progress with the possibility of transferring to another committee room nearby, which would still enable the live feed to resume. So we will make a decision on that a bit later. I wasn't made aware yesterday that there were some sound problems with the live feed, but I believe they were resolved, Miss Ellis, weren't they? I had wondered whether it was because too many microphones were on at the same time, but I'm no technical expert. But hopefully those watching on a live feed will be able to hear us. Any other sort of matters of business before we proceed? No. Mr. Taylor, yes? Yeah.
I'd like to submit a copy of our remarks yesterday and the evidence behind them. I have a copy or stick.
That's fine. I think what the best thing to do would be to find someone from the council just to take a couple of copies, and then I'll accept that as an evidence document, and then the two parties will have one, but that will be fine. And just to remind you, we're hearing formal evidence today, but if you have any questions related to the ecology evidence from the appellant, after cross-examination and before any re-examination, if you've got any questions, let me know, and you can pose them through me to this witness.
Yes, I do.
Yeah, okay. Well, I'll look out for that at the appropriate time. Okay, I think that's all from me. So I will now pass over to Mr. Simons to introduce his witness.
Thank you very much. Good morning, Mr. Saunders.
Good morning.
Now, so Mr. Saunders has produced a proof of evidence and a rebuttal proof of evidence. Those will be the main things that you want to have handy. And you tell us, Mr. Saunders, on page 1 of your proof that you're Joseph Saunders. You set out your various academic qualifications, and you tell us that you're a full member of the Chartered Institute of Ecology and Environmental Management. You've been practicing as an ecologist since 2004. You've been a director at Ecology Solutions since 2012. Among other things, you tell us that you've designed and implemented a large number of mitigation strategies for a number of different species, including, of course, dormice, which will be the focus of the thing I want to ask you about today, having held, as you explain, multiple protected species development licenses. More on that anon. Now, does all of that sound about correct?
That's correct.
Mr. Saunders, before we get into the key things on which this, disagreement, or at least was disagreement until yesterday, could you set out first any important matters of agreement? Is there anywhere where you see the parties coming together on topics that are relevant to your evidence, either before today or as a result of what happened yesterday?
Yes, there are a number of matters which I think are important to identify that are now agreed. These can be listed as follows. So, effects on statutory and non-statutory designations, including Blackwater Estuary, SPA, Ramsar and Essex Coast, SAC. The appeal site falls within the zone of influencer, and therefore financial contributions and provision of open space are requirements and have been agreed.
Would you mind putting the microphone a bit closer to you? I'm struggling to, probably just me, but it might just be worth maybe just projecting the old. Perfect. Sorry, yeah. You were saying, was there anything else you wanted to touch on that topic?
No, I think that covers statutory and non-statutory sites, which are in agreement. The effects on priority habitats, also in agreement. Potential effects on priority protected species, save for dormice, are in agreement. And the provision of measurable biodiversity net gains have also been agreed together with a consideration of additionality.
So we've got agreement on lots of things in respect of habitats, species, BNG, protected sites, etc. But of course, dormice was the focus of the objection yesterday in Mr. Harvey's evidence. So could you set the scene for us then, moving to dormice, on what is the right approach in your view for someone in the planning inspector's position approaching a topic like this? How should he be thinking about the issue of dormice?
Okay, well, obviously it's a material consideration, being a protected species, that's first and foremost. This scheme is outlined, and therefore all matters reserved, save for access. As such, it's that the precise detail that would require to support an EPS licence is not currently available and would not be available into the point of the reserved matter stage. Natural England would not grant a licence against outline consent alone. And it's because of the precise detail that's required at the detail stage. So that a full assessment and consideration to those provisions couldn't be fully considered. The strategy proposed provides a framework in this instance that, in my view, provides sufficient detail to allow this, the test at this stage to be completed.
When you say the test at this stage, what test is it that you have in mind?
Well, as detailed yesterday, the defined requirements by case law for this permission is simply that it would not be unlikely that an EPS licence would be secured from Natural England.
And what would, in your view, when it comes to trying to, in due course, satisfy Natural England of the pros and cons of granting a licence, what would be the sort of mission critical criteria that they'd be looking at, if you like? What will they have in their mind?
They've got 3 derogation tests essentially to consider when departing from the legislation that protects dormice or European protected species. They're obviously detailed within the Conservation of Habitats and Regulations 2017. These are, in order, the preservation of public health and public safety or other imperative reasons of overriding public interest, including those of a social or economic nature and beneficial consequences of primary importance to the environment. It's imperative reasons for overriding public interest, including social or economic nature, which would be prevalent in this instance. Secondly, no satisfactory alternative. And thirdly, the action authorised would not be detrimental to the maintenance of the population of species concerned by the favourable conservation status in their natural range. So the first 2 tests, principally planning considerations, that would be typically met through the granting planning consents. And the 3rd test is maintaining the population at favourable conservation status. And this one is probably purely an ecological consideration.
So on this topic of favourable conservation status, or FCS as they abbreviate it to in some of their documentation, to ask a sort of basic question, what does that actually mean? What is a favourable conservation status for, say, dormice in particular? How does one maintain it? What are we thinking about?
This is usefully outlined within the Conservation Guide handbook at page 54, which stipulates...
A moment, let me just find... So the you're talking about the Dormouse Conservation Handbook, core document 1.12.
Yeah.
Sorry, far away. What page?
Page 54.
54. Page 54, core document 1.12. We've got section 6.3, exceptions and licenses.
That's correct.
Right. Where do you want to take us here?
The key element is the central column, halfway down. Favourable conservation status is defined in the Habitats and Species Directive, Article 1. Conservation status is defined as the sum of influences acting on the species concerned that may affect the long-term distribution and abundance of its population within the territory. The advice from Natural England that is that there should be no net loss of the local population status, taking into account factors such as population size, viability, and connectivity. And these are the principles that have been material in design of the strategy.
So we're interested in no net loss in population status, taking account of population size, viability and connectivity.
That's good.
What does population status mean?
The viable population for its long-term survival.
I see. Right. So that's what we're interested in, or what the Natural England will be interested in due course, this test of favourable conservation status. Could you just summarise, I think briefly, given the agreement yesterday on the adequacy of the surveys, but just summarise for the inspector what actually has been done on the site so far as dormice are concerned, and what's been found?
Okay, certainly. So through my first initial visit to the site, I identified habitats that could be suitable for supporting the species.
Just to be clear, you have visited the site, have you?
Several times, sir.
Well, when was the first time you visited?
First time I visited the site was back in, I think, I'd have to refer. It was prior to this instruction for this scheme. Indeed, it was an accompanied visit with Basildon Borough Council. And
is it important, in your view, to visit sites when you're undertaking this sort of exercise?
I believe so.
And why is that?
To have an understanding of the habitat's presence, to review their condition, just genuinely have a feel for the site and its attributes and what ecological significance could be attributed to those habitats and features.
In any event, thank you. So you said when you visited, you noted species which might be suggestive of dormice.
Yes, well, actually, prior to going to the site, we did a detailed desk study to review background records to allow the site to be placed in a local context. These show the presence of dormice within the locality, hence raising the potential of dormice being present on site, which is commonplace and best practice. Visiting the site, obviously, ascertaining habitats that could support the population of dormice, and thereafter completing detailed surveys in 2020 and 2021 through nest tube, nest boxes, and tunnel footprint surveys or footprint tunnel surveys. These were undertaken to ascertain presence and use and potential distribution, albeit noting where suitable habitats are present and presence is found, you should assume distribution across those habitats.
So you find presence through those surveys, you then assume distribution of dormice across the habitat. In terms of the acceptability of the survey work, there's all sorts of metrics in the Dormouse Conservation Handbook that talks about, you know, how good or not good your survey effort has been. Appears to be common ground now, but just to put a pin in it, what's your assessment of the survey work that's been done, measured against the guidance in the Dormouse Conservation Handbook?
The survey work was excessive against the requirements to meet standard thoroughness, and that's a key test. So thoroughness is considered to be met when a score of 20, and the scoring system, sir, is done against the weighting of the likelihood of dormice being encountered through nest tube surveys. A basic score of 20 is considered to be adequate and meet the test of thoroughness. Our survey effort scored 32. Moreover, the advice and the guidance is that a 50 density of tubes across the site is sufficient. We distributed 99, so effectively doubling that density of nest tubes.
And you found dormice?
We found dormice.
And so you have sought at this outline stage to produce a scheme to mitigate implications of the development for those dormice. Could you talk the inspector through what work has been done on that so far? So I suppose in particular, there's something called a Dormouse Mitigation Technical Note, which is Appendix 6 to your proof of evidence, which sets it all out in a fair amount of detail. But could you do, I mean, the inspector no doubt read that already, but just at a higher level, could you talk the inspector through essentially what's been done, what the analysis has been in terms of mitigation, and how things are looking at the moment?
Okay. So the site was identified as supporting dormice, not across the whole site, in considered areas of actually elevated suitability, but certainly not across the whole site. Using my professional judgment and guidance documents, I consider there to be habitat present of low, medium and high suitability. And across the site, that totals 4.77 hectares. This includes 1.28 hectares of low-grade habitat, i.e. habitat of poor structure and poor phylistic diversity, 2.79 hectares of medium grade habitat that supports some foraging opportunities and nesting sites, but its structure is typically poor or degraded and would be unsuitable to support a viable population. And 0.7 hectares of high quality habitat, which was considered to be supporting a good diversity of food sources, good structure, and various available nesting sites with connectivity to the wider area.
And just could I just ask before you leave that description of how you did that? We see that plan, don't we? That shows where those different zones are. The inspector, I think, has seen it already. Maybe fine. It's plan Eco 2 attached to your dormouse mitigation technical note. It's PDF page 16 of that. Now you don't need to turn it up now, just for the inspector's note. It's the one with the blue wash, the yellow wash, and the pink wash that we looked at a little bit yesterday. So it shows that the areas of high suitability that you identify, your 0.7 hectares, are these sort of strips along the northern boundary of the site and round to the northeastern boundary of the site as well.
That's correct.
So the inspector can see where all of that, where you've reached all of those judgments.
And regarding the assessment process, the key features for dormice have been fundamental in assigning these various grades of suitability. For example, the woodland in the southwest of the site, so, has been considered to be low suitability.
Yes, that's the blue wash.
That's correct. The blue wash and the ecological features plan, I believe that's considered to be scattered trees. We have refined that during updated surveys this year to consider it to be other woodland. But nonetheless, it's a single young age class of oak trees with no extremely limited understory.
Could you just touch on one of the questions the inspector asked yesterday? So what? You say it's a young set of trees with limited understory. What are the implications of that so far as dormice might be concerned?
Dormice are an arboreal species. So during their active season, they move through the canopy and understory. So connectivity to enable them to move through the environment to meet their ecological requirements is key. So the absence of a well-defined and established understory limits the availability and resources within that environment. So a single age and particularly young stand of oak trees that is present in this location has limited suitability in terms of that provision. Indeed, we didn't find any use of that area of the site during the excessive surveys that have been completed, including footprint surveys.
That's the low area of suitability that you identify. Could you just talk us through the high area, the hedgerows along the top of the site and round the corner? Yeah. Why were they identified as what you call high suitability?
They're particularly species rich, H1, H4 and H5, so they're of a good structure, approximately 6 meters in height. The H1 is considered to be probably a more old or ancient boundary feature, and the connectivity is particularly high in that area also. The number of fruiting species was probably material in my judgment in considering that to be of high quality for dormice.
Right. So we've got low, we've got high, we've got medium. That's your assessment of what's on the site. What then is the strategy so far as that of mitigating impacts on dormice which are associated with this development?
The mitigation strategy submitted is based against the retention of habitats of identified high value for dormice, indeed those that have been identified as being used by the species, and the enhancement of the retained habitats to elevate their carrying capacity.
What does that mean?
It means providing an increase in available resources, both foraging, nesting sites, and connectivity, both within the habitat and the wider area, to meet the ecological requirements for the species.
What kind of new species would it be possible to introduce into this area in order to make life a bit easier for dormice?
Well, as we heard yesterday, dormice or hazel dormouse. Hazel is a species which is particularly considered of high importance for the species generally. That species, hazel, is not present within the site, and therefore the provision of hazel together with honeysuckle, which is a species which both offers a foraging resource, but equally provides substrates for nest building, stripping off the bark of honeysuckle and making the nests from that are particularly key. So providing those species would elevate the available resources.
You've talked about nest boxes. Could you just explain to the inspector what the use of those is, or why are they included? Where are they included, and what are the sort of implications of nest boxes as part of the strategy?
Nest boxes have been defined and set out within the conservation handbook and just general best practice as being a available tool for conservation efforts for dormice to allow for an increase in carrying capacity. This is detailed at page 52 of the conservation handbook, which I believe we spoke about yesterday, or Mr. Harvey was considering that in a woodland setting. It does have implications for hedgerows, small fragments of woodland, etc. And within that guidance document, it stipulates or states nest boxes appear to increase the carrying capacity of habitat, sometimes doubling the population density.
And just again for lay people in the room, carrying capacity, a term that came up a bit yesterday, could you just explain what that means?
It means the habitat being able to support a higher density of dormice.
Okay. Right. Can I ask you a question about sequence? There's in your mitigation strategy note, that's Appendix 6 to your evidence, there's reference to certain habitats being retained, certain new ones being created, and also certain habitats being removed and cleared actually to make way for some of the scheme. Could you talk the inspector through how you'd anticipate that being done in such a way as to minimise implications for dormice?
Okay, certainly. So we've advocated the use of a two-stage clearance strategy. This is considered best practice. It reduces the disturbance on dormice. Essentially, you remove gradually or systematically suitable habitat that is licensed, first and foremost, removing that down to approximately 500, 600 mil above height during the winter, when dormice would be hibernating at ground level. As they emerge from hibernation, they'll disperse to the retained and improved woodland, hedgerows, etc. And thereafter, a summer clearance of grimming out that vegetation would be completed. It must say that all the enhancements and provisions, nest boxes, log piles, additional planting, and indeed supplementary feeding have already commenced in the retained habitats prior to that clearance exercise.
You've got this strategy that's summarised in your technical note. Could I ask for your view, taking it all in the round then, looking at the whole thing together? I'll ask you for a moment about some of the criticisms that are made of what's been done, but your view of the mitigation strategy, is it likely to do what it says on the tin? Is it likely in the end to result in a scheme which is licensable or licensed by Natural England? If so, why so? If not, why not?
I believe so. I believe the mitigation was drafted allows for the carrying capacity of the retained and elevated habitats together with the additional habitat provisions to offset the quantity and value of the habitats being moved. The habitats to be retained are fully connected to the wider environment. It must say that is a key component to dormice conservation, and also being material in this design. Having held a number of dormice licenses and held a survey and handling license since 2006, I believe I am confident in the mitigation as drafted would be acceptable and enable the favourable conservation tests to be satisfied and any EPS licence to be secured from Natural England.
That's your view. Let's consider the big five. Is it five? Big 5 points that Mr. Harvey levels against you that he spoke to yesterday. They're at 3.15 of his proof of evidence, but I'll read each one out to you and ask. I mean, you've rebutted all of them in writing, but just ask for high-level comments in respect of each of them so that we're clear on where you stand. So the first of the allegations in the bullet points is, he says that the value of the site's dormouse population has been understated. What's your response?
Well, the surveys have already been accepted as being excessive in terms of the effort completed. This recorded a peak count of 3 dormice and a further 24 nests across the whole of the survey period. And I considered the site in my assessment to be of local value, i.e. the habitats present within the site would be of importance to support the local dormice population. Notwithstanding that, I do accept the points that were raised yesterday about the relative scarcity or reduction of presence across Essex as a whole, but nonetheless within the local setting, dormice are relatively abundant in the county context, and hence that local value of importance was identified. The importance of the dormice population has been material in the illustrative design process. We've held that in high regard through the design process. The evidence recorded from the surveys, I believe that the assessment of a low to medium population across the appeal site is reasonable. Looking at national densities of 2.2 adults per hectare, as detailed yesterday and set out within the conservation handbook, this could be considered that at best the appeal site could support 10 dormice.
So just to be clear, you've explained why you don't accept that the value of the site's population has been understated. But given what you've said about the way the mitigation proposals have been designed, would it even make any difference? Even if Mr. Harvey were right that the value of the site's population has been understated, given the way that you've approached mitigation, does it matter for these purposes?
No, and not in that strict standing.
The next one is there's no information, Mr. Harvey says, about the hazel dormouse population's position in what he calls the local context. So I think we're looking beyond the boundaries of the site for that one. What's your assessment of that criticism?
Well, we didn't have access to off-site habitats, and it wasn't viable to complete those surveys in this instance. And there's no guidance or statutory requirement which requires this need for the assessment process for the planning application and or a future licence application.
So it's not something Natural England require you to do?
No.
Right. Well, what is your assessment of the extent of, if you like, connectivity with wider habitats for dormice?
Well, as is frequently detailed both within the original ecological assessment, but subsequent dormice strategy and further in rebuttals and proof of evidence, the acknowledgement of suitable habitat within the local area is acknowledged. Connectivity, as I said, is a pillar of dormice conservation and has been supported and detailed in the design of this strategy.
But the strategies have regard to, you've assumed connectivity and you've designed for that.
Indeed.
So even if, again, same question as for the first bullet, even if Mr. Harvey was right that more surveys all around the area should have been required, does it make a difference in terms of the mitigation that's actually being proposed?
Not in my view. We've sought to provide a strategy which confirms and allows the favourable conservation status test to be met within the appeal site. Connectivity is key to that. It allows the movement of animals from the site, out of the site, and animals from outside the site into the site, as detailed yesterday. Dormice wouldn't have regard to a site boundary. They would move to where available habitats were present.
All right, that's the first two. Third one is that you've not considered, it said, the change from rural to urban habitats, with a particular focus on cat predation and lighting. What's your response to that one?
Well, firstly, I don't think the appeal site is fully removed from current effects of urbanisation. It is not purely a rural site. There are effects from urbanisation likely to extend within the site. But nonetheless, it is acknowledged that through the proposed development, there would be an increase of such effects. I advised in my rebuttal that there's evidence to detail that it's not common that cat predation is a significant factor on dormice conservation. The arboreal nature of the species and preferred hunting behaviour from cats allows that conclusion to be reached. Nonetheless, whilst I believe it's not a significant risk, the provision of alternative, more favoured foraging grounds for cats, such as rough grassland, would further reduce any potential and limited effect. In regards to lighting, it is a key consideration. Dormice are predominantly nocturnal, and therefore a sensitive and required lighting strategy would be required at the detailed stage that would ensure retained and enhanced habitats for dormice and other nocturnal species is safeguarded.
Thank you. That's the third. The fourth on the list is the mitigation strategy does not, Mr. Harvey says, reflect the time it takes for new habitats to be beneficial. So this is one about the time taken for things to bed in, if you like. What's your response to that one?
The planting type, including the size of the planting, shall of course be obviously a matter for the reserve stage, the reserve matter stage. In regard to licensing, at table E1.3 of the method statement, so it specifies and seeks for detail regarding planting types, stock, etc. And this is where that additional detail would be provided. I've advised that obviously using a more mature planting stock would expedite the production of fruiting through that new habitat provision. And moreover, I've proposed supplementary feeding, which has been used on another of my licensed sites and used well in a wild population. That position was obviously discussed and supported by Natural England at the licensing stage. The provision of nest boxes and dug-in log piles shall provide immediate benefits in terms of elevating nesting sites for the population. So yes, overall, well, it's also important to note that the favourable conservation status test, as detailed before, so is associated with long-term distribution and abundance of the population. Whilst it's important to review short and medium-term effects, the key wording is tied to the long-term.
Thank you. Right, last but not least, in fact, last, but in fact, I think this was the most important point that was raised against you by Mr. Harvey. So he said, the biggest point is the idea that the mitigation strategy you have designed results in a net loss of hazel dormouse habitat. This idea of there being a net loss, it was referred to as a halving or thereabouts. So this is the big point against you. Can you answer it? What's your position on this idea of a net loss?
The no net loss in area is not an absolute position in licensing, as we heard yesterday. With licensing being carried out on a case-by-case basis,